Now, I want to tell you what I do when I'm going to fabricate a board. So let's say the board came in yesterday, and the first thing I do is take it out of the envelope and look at the board. It looks beautiful. It's purple and gold plated and just a beautiful looking board. I would like to just make a necklace and hang one around my neck. So the next thing is, after I sleep on it and get up fresh in the morning, I'm ready to try to put the board together. So you don't just slap paste on there and go looking for parts. There is a time limit. So before you even think about putting paste on the board, you've got to organize your parts. So what I do is I take a sheet of paper. I've got a little wooden board that has an inset in it. So if I put parts in there, they won't go rolling off onto the floor. They're held inside of this little wooden board. It's a frame. So I take a piece of paper, 8.5 by 11, and I draw a little square, and I go through the bill of materials, and let's say we start with the capacitors. So for all of the 0.1 microfarad bypass capacitors, I draw a little square. I put the capacitor references next to the square. I put 0.1 microfarad, and then I go and dispense that many 0.1 microfarad capacitors from the tape and put them in that little square. And we got to do this so that we don't jostle this little setup. That's why it's on a board. If you have to move it, you just move the board carefully. So basically, I lay out squares that are labeled with the part reference, the value, and inside of the square, I put the parts. So it's all laid out, and you are all organized. Think about it. For one thing, you want to make sure you have all the parts you need. Maybe you forgot to order something, or you ordered the wrong thing. And for another thing, you want things organized so you can efficiently pick up parts and put them onto the board. You may also want to take some time right now to use the microscope, and for the parts that have orientation, to get them face up and in known orientation, so when you go to put them on the board, you're all set to go. Maybe you can do this without magnification, but at my age, I need magnification. So I have a microscope. It was like a $79 microscope with a 7-inch display on it. That's the big deal. So you have your microscope ready, you have your parts ready, and then you go and you paste the board. Now use whatever technique you're good at with to stencil the board or to put paste on the board. But the reason why we laid the parts out first is because once you put the paste on the board, you're running on a clock. So the best time to populate the board is immediately after you paste it, because then the paste is tacky and your parts will sink into the paste. The longer you wait, the drier the paste gets, and you'll end up with just being able to place the parts on top of the paste. Now, that's fine if it's not tacky, so long as you don't breathe on it. So what happened to me today was I got all my parts, I pasted the board, I got it under the microscope, and a lot of people say place the small components first and then the big components, but really I have decided it's a combination. I decided I'm going to place the hardest to place components first, because it's potential that you mess up when you're placing the hardest to paste part, and you're going to need to clean the board and start over. So better to do those first. So I've got 2 fine pitched chips on this board, and I put them on first. Then my wife said, let's go to the store. And I was like, okay, I've got about a 2-hour window here. Let's go to the store. And by the time I got back, I was placing parts on top of the paste, not really sinking into the paste. Now, some of these parts are extremely light. So that means when you carry the board from the table where you put the parts on to whatever your method is for reflow or soldering, a hot plate, a reflow oven, hot air, you got to be careful not to jostle the board because the parts could shift. So if the paste was more tacky, that's less of a concern. Now I have a reflow oven. Here's a picture of it. And what I have been doing is preheating the reflow oven. So I run a cycle first so that basically the drawer is heated up. Then put the board in. But when you do that, the oven will have an initial cool down for the first little blip on the curve to bring it down to temperature. So it runs the fan. And then it follows the curve. I think that generally is good because you're not heating up the drawer initially. Well, because my parts were just lying on top of the paste, I didn't want any fan blowing the parts around. So I ran it from cold. When you run it from cold, this reflow oven will have a few of its little tick marks well below the curve because it's heating up the chamber and it's heating up the drawer itself. And then it gets onto the curve and you're fine. Now, maybe in practice this doesn't matter, but I think it's better for it to do a slight cool down at the beginning so that it's a hot drawer and you're not wasting time below the curve. So I hope that's a little bit of good information about how to put the board together.